The Austrian Grand Prix concluded successfully at the Red Bull Ring last week, staging 2 thrilling F1 races. Since the beginning of the weekend, there was a close battle between Verstappen and the 2 McLaren teammates for victories. However, Verstappen was able to emerge as the best performer of the weekend by beating 2 McLaren drivers on most of the occasions. Surprisingly though, the victory of the Grand Prix event was clinched by George Russell, who occupied the 3rd fastest car in the grid. If you didn't watch the race, you may surely wonder how that happened. Welcome back to Total F1. This is our full race report of the Austrian GP race weekend, and we have summarized everything for you. But before we proceed, hit the subscribe button and smash the bell icon for more exciting updates. The free practice session on Friday morning was the only free practice session of the weekend, and teams did everything to fine-tune their machineries to yield the optimum performances from them. Verstappen brought a red flag to the session after detecting an engine issue in his RB20. However, the Red Bull people were lucky to solve the issue within a few minutes. Meanwhile, one of the McLaren cars experienced a big ride through the gravel trap and was lucky to rejoin the track without experiencing any damage. Verstappen, Piastri, Leclerc, Sainz and Hamilton emerged as the 5 fastest drivers of the session. During the sprint shootout, drivers who failed to cross the first hurdle were Ricciardo, Hülkenberg, Bottas, Albon and Zhou. Despite the big spin at turn 9, Tsunoda was able to qualify for SQ2 by recording the 15th fastest time in a later attempt. After experiencing a big slide at the final corner, Fernando Alonso destroyed the opportunity of setting a competitive lap time good enough for SQ3. That means Alonso's best effort was good enough only for the 13th fastest lap of the session, and he was eliminated at the end of SQ2, alongside Magnussen, Stroll, Tsunoda and Sargent. At the start of SQ3, Charles Leclerc experienced an issue with his challenger, however he rejoined the track to set a competitive lap time to reserve a better spot in the starting grid. After a competitive session, Max Verstappen emerged as the fastest driver, becoming the pole sitter of the sprint race. Norris and Piastri were the 2nd and 3rd fastest drivers of SQ3, reserving higher spots in the starting grid. They were followed by Russell, Sainz, Hamilton, Perez, Ocon, Gasly and Leclerc. The pole sitter Verstappen was able to take a good start to the race ahead of the 2 McLaren challengers behind him. Piastri tried to attack his teammates since the beginning of the race, but Norris defended very well, protecting his 2nd spot. Meanwhile, there was a brief battle between Sainz and the 2 Mercedes challengers, and it came to an end when Sainz overtook Russell to the 4th spot of the race. Norris tried to attack Verstappen on lap 3 by taking an inside line. However, Verstappen cleverly used all of his defensive skills to keep this fast-moving challenger behind him. After chasing him down for 2 more laps, Norris overtook Verstappen into the race lead with the assistance of DRS, but he wasn't able to hold that position till the conclusion of that lap, as Verstappen used his skills and experience brilliantly to retake the race lead. When Norris slowed down with that pass, Piastri took advantage by passing his teammate into the 2nd spot of the race within the same lap. Carlos Sainz was under a great deal of stress from the 2 Mercedes drivers, and Russell was able to pass him back to the 4th spot of the race. Meanwhile, Alonso went off the track on lap 19 in order to avoid a collision with Magnussen's car, which tried to overtake. However, the greatest battle here was observed between 2 McLaren teammates as the battle continued to the very last seconds of the race. Piastri and Norris were able to complete the race as 2nd and 3rd respectively, behind the race winner Max Verstappen. 2 Mercedes teammates, Russell and Hamilton, crossed the finish line as 4th and 6th, sandwiching Sainz in 5th. The final 2 point-offering spots were clinched by Leclerc and Perez. Albon, Stroll, Bottas, Sargent and Zhou were the drivers who were eliminated at the end of Q1. With the extreme competitiveness between different F1 teams, this qualifying round turned into a thrilling one. Ricciardo, Magnussen, Gasly, Tsunoda and Alonso were the drivers who failed to cross the hurdle of Q2. There was a close competition between Verstappen and McLaren for the pole. Meanwhile, Leclerc experienced a rough ride through gravel and grass after losing the control of his car. Piastri was able to end the session with the third best lap time. However, his lap time was deleted, as it was later noticed that he had exceeded the track limits. This resulted in dropping him down to 7th in the standings. The first 5 spots of the starting grid were occupied by Verstappen, Norris, Russell, Sainz and Hamilton. The remaining top 10 spots were reserved by Piastri, Perez, Hülkenberg and Ocon. As the pole sitter of the race, Verstappen made a good launch at the start, occupying the race lead. Meanwhile, George Russell was able to put good pressure on Lando Norris from the 3rd spot of the race by going wheel to wheel within the first lap. Further, Mercedes driver Lewis Hamilton was able to climb up to the 4th spot by completing a clever overtake against Carlos Sainz. Meanwhile, Piastri went off the road by putting his left tyre on gravel and lost 1 spot to Charles, who was running behind him. Sergio Perez was able to improve his track position by 2 spots into 6th at the end of the first lap as well. Due to a contact made by Leclerc with Piastri in the first lap, the Ferrari driver had to pit his car to take a new nose at the start of the second lap. There was a close contest between the 2 Mercedes teammates for the 3rd spot, and Hamilton was able to pass Russell at that moment. However, Russell fought back to reclaim his spot. On lap 7, Piastri was able to complete his overtake against Perez into the 6th spot. While trying to overtake, Alonso gave a tap to the right side of Zhou Guanyu's Sauber, pushing him to the runoff area. However, the Chinese driver was lucky to rejoin without experiencing any major incident, and Alonso was handed over a 10-second time penalty for causing that collision. During lap 35, Ocon was able to complete a clean overtake against Alonso, and in the subsequent lap, he was passed by Gasly too, as Aston Martin ran out of tyres. Just after the overtake, one Alpine went off the track and rejoined the track without experiencing much damage. Then a very close battle started between 2 Alpine teammates, and after going wheel to wheel several times, Gasly completed his overtake on the 41st lap. Meanwhile, Piastri was able to improve his position up to 3rd by completing 1 more overtake against Hamilton on lap 48, and this was clear evidence of the performance possessed by the McLaren challengers at present. Verstappen decided to enter the pit lane to take a new set of tyres, and it didn't go as planned due to a delay in changing the left rear tyre. That pit stop was 6.5 seconds long, and he further experienced a huge lockup in the same lap after rejoining the race. Lap by lap, Lando Norris was able to close down his gap with Verstappen and finally launched his attack on the Dutchman on the 55th lap, but it was not successful. Then, 4 laps later, he was able to complete his overtake. But this time, he was unnecessarily late on brakes and went off the road, exceeding the track limits. That means he had to hand over his race lead back to the Red Bull driver. But that was not the end of the battle for the race lead, and Norris tried to overtake Verstappen again on lap 63 by taking an inside path while pushing Verstappen to the margin of track limits. The Dutchman created a path through the runoff area to maintain his lead without damage. Then in the following lap, both made contact with each other while causing punctures on both the cars. Verstappen lost his entire rear left tyre, and Norris was able to take the race lead for a brief moment. But Norris also appeared to be dealing with a puncture, and he was handed over a 5-second penalty too. This was a totally unexpected scenario, and that created the opportunity for George Russell to take the race lead on the 64th lap. Norris was ordered to box immediately for a quick repair, but it was not successful, and the McLaren engineers decided to retire Lando's car. But Max Verstappen didn't want to give up on the race and continued his run as the 5th driver of the pack till the race concluded. At the end of the 71 laps long event, George Russell crossed the finish line as the winner of the race. The remaining podium spots were occupied by Piastri and Sainz, thanks to the collision that happened between Verstappen and Norris. Hamilton completed the race as 4th by missing the podium by a considerable margin. Despite the puncture, Verstappen was able to hold his 5th spot in the final standings. The 2 Haas drivers, Hülkenberg and Magnussen, completed the race as 6th and 8th, sandwiching Perez in the 7th spot. The last 2 point-offering spots were occupied by Ricciardo and Gasly. After the race in Austria, Verstappen and his Red Bull team still held the lead in both championships in spite of the sudden rise of the McLaren team. The developing competitiveness within the sport is truly a positive thing to attract a new fan base. How do you rate the Austrian Grand Prix? Share your thoughts in the comments section below. Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed the video, subscribe to the channel to get more exciting Formula 1 news. And we'll see you in the next video, guys. Goodbye.